Okay, welcome to Research Methods. This is chapter 6. Today we are talking about descriptive research, which is research that includes surveys, observations, that kind of stuff, the non-experimental stuff. So we're going to talk about all this stuff. We're going to talk about, today we're going to start talking about the survey, because you guys have a survey due in a few weeks. And then, and after that part, at some point we'll get to observational research and case studies, which I don't recommend that you do those. I recommend that you all do a survey. It's the easiest thing to do. Okay, so let's actually get started and talk about what a survey is. Actually, first, an introduction to descriptive research. What is descriptive research? Okay, what is the goal of descriptive research? The goal of descriptive research is to describe a single variable or to describe each individual when several are involved. That sounds a bit technical, but with descriptive research, what you do is basically you measure variables. Okay, you measure a set of variables that exist naturally. That would be if you're doing an observation, or you can measure variables, let's say, with a survey. Okay, it's usually not a single variable, and as a matter of fact, in this class, you cannot get away with measuring a single variable. Okay, you cannot do a survey with one just by asking one question. Those surveys do exist, okay, but you're required to do more for this class, okay, not something that's in, okay. With descriptive research, it's not always concerned with relationships among variables. They're not always concerned as to, you know, what is the relationship, let's say, between age, let's say, and, you know, tendency to commit crime or something like that. They're not interested in those kind of things. And we'll have a separate chapter where we'll talk about correlational research, right? But that isn't completely true. You can actually look at correlations when you're doing a survey. As a matter of fact, if you're doing an honors project for this class, you're required to do something like that, okay? To do something more than just describe. Descriptive research doesn't necessarily have to involve correlations. It doesn't have to involve doing, you know, tests of testing for differences. But if you're doing an honors project, I'm going to require a little bit more, okay? But the results by themselves can capture things that are interesting, okay? Like for instance, like how often people consume alcohol in a week, or, you know, when people start dating or whatever it is, or naturally occurring behavior, you know, behavior that you observe out there, like children's play behavior, all that can be interesting. If you're doing an observation, you can see that. So that is descriptive research. And we're going to talk today about, from now on today, about surveys, okay? The survey research design, which in your book is chapter 9. And I know I'm not going in order, but that's okay. We need to talk about the survey now before your actual survey is due, which is in a couple of weeks, okay? So what is a survey? You guys know what a survey is. Everyone's heard of surveys, okay? But here's the definition for you guys. A survey is just a type of research design that obtains a description from a particular group of people, okay? So again, you're describing, you know, what people do, what they think, whatever it is. But you basically ask a bunch of questions of people, okay? You have a bunch of people answer some questions. That's what a survey is. The results can describe, for instance, how many high school students drink. They're not supposed to be drinking yet, okay? They're not legally able to drink, but a lot of them do. Well, you know, how many of them drink? What percentage of them, for instance? How much do they drink? When is it that they drink? Okay, because obviously it's, you know, they can't do it when, you know, people who care about the law or people who can enforce the law are around, and where, okay? Or you might have heard about companies that, you know, try to do research with their consumers, companies seeking accurate descriptions of their customers. You know, when you get that little warranty registration card, right, with a product, and it says, please register your product so we can better serve you, right? You think that somehow that, some people think that if you don't mail that in, then your warranty isn't really valid or it's not going to be enforced. And that's not true. You don't have to fill out that thing for your warranty to still be valid, but they want you to send that card in. They want to know who you are, how much money you make, and, you know, why you bought the product maybe and what other products you're interested in. So they want to know basically who you are. They want to know who buys their products, okay? And you know, what other things they might be able to sell you. Okay, surveys come and I mean, you can ask about just about anything with surveys, okay? And it's the easiest thing you can do, and that's what I require you guys to do when it comes to your project, to design your own survey. And we'll talk about how, okay? There's 4 basic issues that you have to figure out with surveys. First, you have to develop your research questions, okay? What are you gonna ask about? I've been telling you guys for weeks now that you have to come up with an idea, right? You know, or a topic, go read about it, and start learning about that, okay? And when you are familiar with the research, you become familiar with the language, and then you might know about what kinds of questions you may ask. So I know some of you, because of procrastination, you're probably behind and you haven't done that. Well, I'm telling you now, you need a topic, you need to go read about it, and you need to be able to come up with some questions that you can put on a form, okay, that I'm gonna grade in 2 weeks, okay? You should know something about your area, okay, to know the proper language to use, what kind of things you can ask about, okay? Another thing is that the questions must be assembled and organized. Yes, we're gonna talk about that today. There's a way to assemble the question, a certain order in which you can put them in, a certain way to organize them, the formatting of the questions, the scale, right? Is it gonna be 1 to 5? Is it yes, no? We'll talk about those kind of things, right? You have to select a process for obtaining participants. And like I told you guys before, for you guys, it's gonna be simple. You're gonna use convenient sampling. It's just whoever's willing, that's who's gonna complete your survey. You have to determine how your survey is gonna be administered. Are you gonna do it through mail, phone, internet? Do it through the internet, okay? Please use Google Forms, okay? Remember, there's a pandemic going on. And you know, normally you can do it in person, but just do it through the internet, it's easier. But yes, you can also call people up. You can mail, send it through the mail. That's just more time consuming. Sending it through the mail is just more expensive. We'll talk about those things, doing it that way, but just do it through the internet, okay? Make it easy on yourself. We'll talk about how we can do that soon. Okay, so what kind of questions can you have in a survey, okay? Well, one type of question that you can have in a survey is an open-ended question, okay? These are questions basically that just ask something, and participants can write whatever they want. You give them a space to write something. So they introduce a topic and allow participants to respond in their own words, okay? Like, for example, what are the most important factors in choosing a college? Okay, let's say that people are transferring from a community college, or they're going from high school straight to college. They can answer this question: what are the most important factors in choosing a college? And you just give them a space, maybe half a page or so for them to write, or maybe a full page, and they write whatever they want. They physically write it in, okay? They can do it on a computer, of course. It can still be done through the internet, or it can be done paper and pencil, and they can write it in, okay? Or what comes to mind when you think of the word love, right? What comes to mind? So those are just some examples, okay? I don't recommend that you use these because this is an introductory class. I want you guys to keep it simple, keep it clean. If you ask these kind of questions, participants will write all sorts of things, okay? And if you don't know the proper way to analyze this data, well, you're just making it harder for yourself, okay? Like, for instance, when a survey question asks, what comes to mind when you think of the word love? Participants can write any number of things, a whole bunch of different things. Do you know how to analyze that? You probably don't, okay? You need to learn how to use certain techniques that you would be more likely to learn about in graduate school, you know? So we're not gonna talk about those techniques here. I don't wanna confuse you. So avoid these kind of questions for now, unless it's something simple, which it still shouldn't be open-ended. Like, it can say, you know, yeah, actually, you could have something open-ended, like says like, okay, what is your age? And then they just write it in, okay? You know, they can write whatever number they want. Hopefully they write the one that's actually true. But that's another open-ended question, but a simple one. But keep away from these other ones, like what is love, right? I mean, they can write any number of things, and it just makes it harder to analyze. Okay, but these are used, okay? How do you think psychologists have figured out, you know, what love is, right? there is research out there that describes what love is. And it started with questions like this, okay? First, they ask participants about what they think it is. They do some analysis and they figure out that, that all these different things seem to be mentioned, and then they do some more analysis, and, that's kind of how they learn about what love is, okay? So those are open-ended questions. You can also, here's some strengths and weaknesses of open-ended questions. There are advantages to open-ended questions, okay? Yes, there's flexibility when participants answer, okay? They can write whatever they want. There's flexibility. Like love can mean different things to different people, okay? And, they have that flexibility to write what they think, okay? It's likely to reveal their true opinions, right? If you give them an open-ended question, then they can write what they want, what they believe, what they think is true, okay? So that's the advantage. But there are several limitations. There are several problems. Different individuals can approach the question differently. What comes to mind when you think of the word love? Some individuals are going to be thinking about romantic love, okay? And they'll mention things like kissing and hugging and sex and things like that. Others might be thinking about friendship and maybe siblings and motherly love and fatherly love and that kind of stuff. And they'll write different things. As I said, also with these types of questions, it's difficult to compare and analyze the responses of different participants. They'll write a whole bunch of different things. How do you analyze that? You don't have the tools right now, okay? And you haven't learned about them. You would learn about that stuff, and you'd have more access to the types of tools to analyze this stuff in graduate school. The researcher imposes a subjective interpretation on the answers. So participants wrote about whatever they wanted to, and you have to kind of interpret that. Okay, some people are going to write a lot, and some people are going to write a little bit. You have to interpret what they said. Willingness or ability of participants to express thoughts. Okay, that can also be a problem. There are some participants that will write a bunch of stuff, and there are some that will just write a few words. And you're supposed to make all this work and somehow be able to analyze it. But yes, there will be quite a variety, a lot of variety when it comes to responses and how much people actually write. So I don't really recommend that you use those unless it's something simple like age, okay, something that's obvious how to answer it. So you can also have what are called restricted questions. I do recommend these restricted questions. These are very, I'll tell you about the advantages in a moment. Let me save that. But restricted questions are questions that present a limited number of response alternatives. With restricted questions, you have options, and you could only select those options. So an example of that would be, do you smoke marijuana? The options could be yes or no. Okay, it's either do you smoke it or do you not smoke it? Please don't have a maybe. Okay, maybe is not a good option. Maybe doesn't tell you anything. Okay, maybe could be yes, it could be no. No, just yes or no. Okay, right? Do you smoke marijuana? Okay, yes or no. Oh, here's another example. What is the highest level of, what is your highest level of education? In other words, how much education have you attained, right? A for high school, B associates, C bachelor's, D master's, E doctorate. But it's still a restricted question. They have to select one of those, okay? Please don't make these things open-ended questions, okay? Otherwise, it makes it more difficult, okay? So restricted questions. Right away, I'll tell you the advantages. The advantages about these is that they're easy to analyze and summarize, okay? Easy to analyze. You can see for the first question there, the percentage of yes responses, the percentage of no responses, you can see, what percentage of, participants have only a high school education, or what percentage of them have, let's say, like a doctorate, okay? So it's easy to analyze. You can, you can determine percentages, proportions. I prefer percentages. Percentages are easier to read, right? But a proportion would be like, oh yeah, like 20 out of 100 participants said that they have, a bachelor's degree or something like that. Okay, it's better to say 20% of participants indicated that they have at least a bachelor's. Okay, so very easy to analyze, easy to summarize. Okay. Those are things you can do. And by the way, you're not going to, when you design your own survey, you're not going to have one kind of question, okay? You're going to have several, okay? These are some that I do recommend that you have. It's good if you have a variety of things, okay? Not the unrestricted ones, but more restricted questions. Not the open-ended ones, but restricted is good. I also like rating scale questions. Rating scale questions, like I said before, are very useful for studying things that are more psychological. So with rating scale questions, they require selection of a numerical value on a predetermined scale. You have a rating scale, and participants select a number that they think represents their response. So an example could be, you know, I am good at math. You know, strongly disagree to strongly agree, right? If they think they're really awful at math and they strongly disagree, they would indicate a 1. If they think they're really awesome at math, right, and they think they're really good at it, they would indicate a 5. If they think they're somewhere in the middle, a 3. Okay, that, yeah, they're okay at math. They're not great. They're not awful. They're okay. If they're not that good, but not really horrible, it would be a 2, right? That's a rating scale questions. I really like those questions, okay? They really help us assess things that are more psychological. You know, it'd be good if you have some of those as well. Okay, you don't have to have everything, but these are good questions to have, or, you know, good types of questions, okay? When it comes to these rating scale questions, participants tend to avoid extremes. They tend to avoid, like, you know, the one, you know, like 5, right? There's not a whole lot of them that will indicate a 5 and say, yeah, I'm awesome at math, okay? Or a whole lot of them that say I'm awful, right? They tend to avoid the extremes. But some of them will give some of those extremes, okay? And when it comes to these rating scale questions, participants have trouble distinguishing more than 9 or 10 levels. Please do not give a rating scale question that's on a scale of 1 to 10. It could be like, how attractive do you think you are on a scale of 1 to 10, right? We've all heard that. Or how attractive do you think she is on a scale of 1 to 10, right? 1 to 10 scales are not useful. There's too many numbers there. Research shows that participants, the average participant, can really distinguish among like 4 different levels. So for your average person, let's say in the US, a scale of 1 to 4, it could be 1 strongly agree, 1 strongly disagree, 4 strongly agree, right? 1 to 4 scale is appropriate for the average person. For those that, you know, are in college, a little bit smarter than average, supposed to be you guys, right? You can give a 1 to 5 scale. So I can recommend that you have a 1 to 4 scale, 1 to 5 scale. I like 1 to 5 scales because it has that midpoint if they're somewhere in the middle, right? No, not 1 to 10, not 1 to 100, okay? No, those are useless, okay? That's just not useless, but people are not that good at distinguishing between 9 and 10, okay? Or between 80 and 70, okay? Those are ridiculous, okay? Scales should not be that long, okay? You shouldn't have that many numbers. Advantages of rating scale questions. Well, these are things that where participants select numbers. So you can do everything with numbers. You can compute the means, the averages. You can compute all the statistics, right? The standard deviations, right? They're easy to understand, right? You know what the average means, right? You know what a 3 is, a 5, whatever it is. Easy to understand for participants. It's a very efficient way to collect data. Participants can answer a lot of questions on these rating scales. If you give them a bunch of open-ended questions, then they can write a whole bunch of things, and you can't give them too many of those open-ended questions. But rating scale questions, you know, you can give them 30, 40, 50 of them, and they can answer those in, probably 15, 20 minutes, okay? So I don't recommend that you make your survey too long, okay? I'll talk about that later when I actually show you some examples. Yeah, you can, when you have a rating scale questions, you can do all the math, which is why I like them, okay? I like these kinds of questions a lot, okay? So yes, use some restricted ones, use these rating scale questions. A limitation of this is you can get what's called a response set, where participants will answer all the questions the same way. Participants will start answering, like 3, 3, 3, 3, and they'll get into some pattern, and they'll just keep doing that. Or they'll start making little zigzags. They'll go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5, 4, and then they'll start playing around with your survey. Okay, if they don't take it seriously. So sometimes you get these response sets, where all the questions are answered the same way, or they start doing other weird things with the rating scales. Okay, that's possible. Here's another example of a rating scale question. This is a Likert scale question. And like I said, I like these, and this is what we mentioned before. I showed one before, I think that has to do with self-esteem, a scale that measures self-esteem. A scale, by the way, is a set of questions that all measure the same thing. For a scale, for instance, what you usually do is you add up all their responses and you divide by the number of questions and you get an average. Like here's one that has to do with math, right? It's a scale, a short one that only has 5 questions that determines, you know, how good you think you are at math. Or if you want to mention it bit more scientifically, or use the actual terms that psychologists use, this would measure basically probably something called self-efficacy in math. It's basically how good you think you are at math. So the first question, so they present the rating scale at the top there. 1 is strongly disagree, 5 is strongly agree, 2 is disagreed, 3 is undecided, 3 basically means it's neutral, 4 is agree, 5 is strongly agree, okay? And then you have the a rating scale for all these different questions. I have a natural talent for mathematics, right? I am good at math. I like mathematics. I'm a good math student. I like mathematics. Math is easier for me than it is for most students. I probably will use mathematics in my future job. Participants answer these questions. And what you usually do is you add up all their responses. So if there was 3, let's say for all of them, just to make the math simple, right? Then that would mean a total of 15 divided by 5, their average is 3. So for this particular person, that means that they are, when it comes to indicating how good they think they are at math, they are basically neutral. They think they're undecided, that they, you know, maybe they're okay, maybe they're in the middle, basically. I don't like undecided. I don't like that term. It's more like neutral. I'm not good. I'm not awful, right? I'm somewhere in the middle. Okay. And that's what a scale is. Some of you are going to have scales in your surveys because you're interested in something like self-esteem or something else that other psychologists have already figured out how to, you know, basically how to assess those. And it's not a good idea to determine your own scale because there's things that are already published. Remember, we talked about reliability. We talked about validity. These things have already been shown to be reliable and valid. Usually if they're published, it usually means they're good. And if you are going to be using a scale, you will need a little bit more help from me. I just showed you how to analyze it, but I'll show you how to do that, how to do the analysis, you know, how to figure out the statistics as well, okay, for several participants. I showed you how to do it for 1. As a matter of fact, there's a video online that I already have posted there that shows you how to do that, and I'll just point to that, okay? But I could give you more help if you need it. But these are rating scale questions, and I really like those. They're really good, okay? Guidelines for constructing a survey. Here's the thing, okay, there's demographic questions. You're probably gonna have demographic questions. I always want you to include some of those, at least 3 of them. Questions like, you know, like what is your, like sex, where they include male, female, you know, intersex, other. There's more options now, okay? Or, you know, ethnicity, age. Those are demographic questions. You should probably have those 3: sex, ethnicity, age. If you want to make ethnicity simple, because ethnicity can be a little complicated, you can call it race, although technically race is technically, like I told you guys before, technically race is not really real. It's scientifically kind of useless, but we can say it's the same thing as ethnicity just for the sake of simplicity, so you can do your survey, but you know, they're not the same thing. So demographic questions, put them at the end. I know we're used to seeing them at the front, but they're supposed to be at the end, okay? Sensitive questions should be in the middle. If you have sensitive questions, question like, let's say, are you aggressive? You know, have you ever stolen something? Those are questions that are a bit sensitive that participants may not want to basically answer honestly. You want to put those in the middle. You want them to answer several questions first, so they get into the habit of answering questions truthfully, and then you hit them up with those questions later. You don't want to put those right up front, because then you're going to make them a bit more defensive. Okay. You want to group questions with the same topic. So questions that all have to do, let's say, with let's say income, not income, but yeah, let's say money. Let's say the survey has them about money, not demographic stuff, but certain things about money. About, you know, I have an example of a survey, for instance, that asks if participants think textbooks are expensive, if they struggle to pay for them, right? Things like that. Those questions that ask about similar things should be put together. That's what that means. If there's questions that all have to do with something else, right? Like, let's say the means in which you acquire information, like through the internet, you know, through tablet, let's say through your smartphone, through a tablet, through a computer, those ask similar questions. Those would all be together as well. I'll show you some example later on when I'm done with the lecture. The format should be really relatively simple and uncluttered, okay? It should look neat, okay? Everything should be properly aligned, the numbers, okay? You know it when you see it, okay? And the good news is that if you use something like Google Forms, it does that for you, okay? It formats it pretty neatly, okay? But if you do it just on a Word doc or something like that, or on a sheet of paper, you know, well, then you have to know how to fix those things, okay? Vocabulary and language style should be easy to understand. Yes, use proper vocabulary, okay? It doesn't have to be fancy vocabulary. Try to avoid language that is, you know, advanced or college level. I mean, the average American doesn't really read at a very high level, okay? So, you know, don't use words like anthropomorphic or something like that, okay? A lot of you probably know what that is. I know what that is, but there's a bunch of people who say, what the hell does that mean, okay? Instead, you could use word like human-like, okay? That means kind of the same thing, okay? So use vocabulary that's relatively simple. It doesn't have to be like really, really simple, but simple, okay? Easy enough for people to understand, okay? Language style, okay? Don't use slang, okay? Don't have a questions like you know, do you smoke weed? You know, it's like, no, it's not weed, okay? It's marijuana. Or do you smoke the chronic, or whatever it is that people call it, okay? Use the proper language, okay? Don't use slang or things like that. And by the way, you might not be aware of how much slang you actually use when you talk until you actually try to write things down in a way that makes sense for everybody, because not everyone shares that language style, by the way. Something I figured out when I went to college and realized how much slang was in my language, okay? Make sure it's easy to understand, okay? Proper language, don't make it too advanced, okay? Believe it or not, the average American doesn't have a really high reading level, okay? But most of your participants will probably be college students, because those are your friends are, and those people you probably know because you're in college. So, you know, yeah, you know, you'll probably be okay, but still don't use language that's too advanced, okay? Selecting relevant and representative individuals. So you want to select, here's the thing, we're going to talk about, we mentioned something about this already, and I'm reminding you of this again, but in the end, you're just going to use, you know, a convenient sample, like I said. But, you know, try to select survey participants to whom the questions are relevant. Like, for instance, if your survey has to do with, for instance, let's say you have your survey has to do with menopause or something like that, okay? Just to give you an example. Well, then you only need to select female participants who are, you know, of a certain age, maybe in their 50s or higher, okay? Women who have gone through that, just an example. Or if you're interested in, let's say, you know, if your questions have to do with depression, right? Then maybe you need to find people who are depressed and have them fill out the survey. And that can be a bit challenging, okay? So you need to think about those things, right? Do I really know 50 people who are depressed? Okay, can I find those people? But try to select participants to whom the questions are relevant. And if I were you, I would come up with questions. They can be in a certain topic, but questions that anybody can answer. Okay, I mean, you can ask everybody about depression, about what they think. It doesn't have to be that, you know, that you have to select people who are depressed, but maybe you just want to find out what percentage of people in the population are depressed. So you ask a whole variety of people about, you know, questions about depression, and then, you know, and then you figure out which ones of them, what percentage of them actually qualify as being depressed, okay? Survey participants must not be too restricted in age, gender, etc. Yeah, you want to be able to generalize, so you don't just only want young participants or only old or only males or only females, unless that's what your survey calls for, right? It could be that you only want older females because you're interested in menopause, right? You know, you don't want to be too restricted, but for the most part, like I told you guys, you're going to use a convenient sample, okay? So most of your participants, yes, they're all going to be around your age, okay? and they're going to be somewhat like you. Okay, so you're going to violate some of these, but it's okay. You're going to use a convenient sample. You're not doing something that you're going to try to publish, but ideally you don't want this sample to be too restricted. Make an effort to select individuals who accurately represent the group, right? The group of people you're interested in, whether it's alcoholics or women who have undergone menopause or whatever it is, pot smokers, you know, or people who smoke weed, whatever you want to call it, right? Just try to select those individuals, right? You may need to consult professional help, right? To help you prepare your survey and identify participants. Yes, there are services available. Don't use that, please. Don't pay for anything, okay? I want you to learn how to do this yourself. And it's really not that hard, and you'll learn a lot more about it, of course, when you go to graduate school, if you should actually specialize in doing surveys, which, you know, you might not. It's not my specialty. My specialty is experiments, okay? Now, administering surveys, how are you going to administer your survey? Okay, how are you going to do this? I just recommend that you do it on the internet, like I said, okay? But there are other options, okay, that you can use, right? You can do mail survey, where you basically, you know, print out your questions, stuff them in envelopes, put some Post-its on them, and mail out to a bunch of people, okay? The good thing about mail surveys is that it's convenient, right? You know, it's not very threatening. Stuff a bunch of envelopes, like I said, put Post-its on and mail out to a bunch of people. People can, you know, ignore it, or they can take it seriously if they want. It's up to them. You can be confident that the survey's responses will be anonymous. You don't know who's, you know, who's really gonna mail them back. Okay, you don't require to, you know, to have a return address. Okay, you don't require names or social security numbers, so you can be more confident about that you're keeping it anonymous. It's simple and it's easy. Okay, yes, they're easy to do, but it has some very serious problems. There's some limitations. They're very expensive. Okay, it may not seem like it's that expensive, but here's the thing. You have to buy a bunch of envelopes. You have to print out all that bunch of paper, okay? Print out all those bunch of surveys, okay? And, you know, you have to stuff the envelopes, and you have to include postage. And you might even need to indicate some little reward to encourage them to fill out the survey. And believe it or not, the cost adds up, okay? Primarily because you're not going to send out 20 surveys. You're going to send out hundreds or maybe thousands, okay? And it's going to be time consuming. It's going to take a lot of time to set all that up, okay, to do all that stuff. The response rate is really low, 10 to 20%. So if you mail out 100 surveys, guess what? You're going to get like 10 back, maybe 20. So if you want to get like 100 or 100 of them, you have to send out thousands. That's why it gets expensive and it gets time consuming, okay? The response rate is really low. You know, I mean, people get something in the mail. I mean, that's not really that relevant to them, or they don't really care. But what do you think they're going to do with it? Just got to throw it in the trash, just like that junk mail. It's junk mail. That's what they're gonna think. Okay. You also get a non-response bias. Those who do complete the survey and actually send it back, that may not be a representative sample. There are certain people who will care more about the issue. Those are the ones that are likely to fill out the survey. Okay. So you're going to get those who are passionate or maybe paranoid about the subject. Let's say your survey has to do with legalization of marijuana, which has already been legalized in this state, but maybe in another state it hasn't. But what they think about that, okay? And guess what you're going to get back? I mean, you're going to get back those who are really strongly in favor, right? Oh yeah, we love weed, right? Yeah, weed all the way, right? Or those that are really against it. But there's a bunch of people in between. And you won't hear too much from those people. You get a very biased sample. The people who are angry are the ones who are going to get back to you, okay? Ones who are going to fill out the survey, okay? Or the people who think you're taking away their rights, you know, that kind of stuff. It's not going to be a representative sample. Just like on Facebook, when somebody posts something that's political, what happens is a bunch of people give a bunch of, they make a bunch of comments, and you see a bunch of hate, a bunch of really extreme stuff that tells you like, wow, I mean, like this is really crazy. People are really, are really crazy about this topic. Like those are just the people who are really offended by that stuff or paranoid about it or whatever it is. It's not necessarily represent. Those are the extreme views. That's what you get with mail-in surveys. Other problems, or actually the way to deal with some of these problems, the way to increase the response rate and reduce the non-response bias, the way to make more people participate, right? More people send it back, and reduce the non-response bias, right? Basically, make it so you get a more representative sample. It's good to include a cover letter with your survey. Cover letter, a letter that explains the importance of the topic, right? Why the results are useful. Why every survey matters, every individual response matters. It's like every vote matters, okay? You emphasize something like that. Well, every response matters, right? Include a contact person. Here's the name, address, and telephone number of someone you can call if you have some concerns and some questions about this. So make it seem more professional, right? The signature of a recognized person, Dr. blah, 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 right? You know, who's the lead, researcher, okay? The lead scientist of the project. That makes it seem more legitimate, less like junk mail, okay? A gift, you can include a gift with a survey. Here's a pen for you to fill out the survey, right? As a token of our appreciation. Or here's $1, right? Please fill out the survey. Here's $1, right? We're giving you something and now you give us a little bit of your time. Please fill out the survey and hand it in. Because when you give people something, they're more likely to give you something back. And in this case, what you want is for them to fill out that survey and send it back. So these things will work, but then of course that makes it more expensive. Pens can be really cheap, okay? But if you give everybody $1, then you're gonna spend thousands of dollars, okay? And sometimes not even $1, it could be like $2 or a $5 bill. I've gotten surveys where there's a $2 bill in there. I remember one like that, okay? I kept the $2, right? And I still didn't mail it in, okay? Just so you know, right? Because many times we just don't wanna be bothered. Okay, but usually, you know, sometimes people will feel, okay, you gave me something, I'm gonna do something nice for you, fill out the survey and send it back. Okay, my wife is so, you know, when she gets these kind of things in the mail, she's just so, doesn't wanna be bothered so much that she'll throw away the whole thing, even if there's $1 in there. Sometimes there's a quarter in there or something like that, something small like that. And I tell her, hey, don't throw that away, there's a quarter in there, get the quarter out first, right? It's a quarter, right? So it's a little reward. They hope that will make it more likely that you're going to respond. But it still will not work for a lot of people, okay? Don't expect your response rate to be very high. You're going to improve it, but it won't be very high still. Give an advance warning, right? You know, if you have their phone number, give them a call ahead of time. Hey, we're going to be mailing out a survey. It'd be good if you fill it out, right? Or hey, or send them a letter. Hey, you're going to be getting a survey. Please look for it and, you know, take it seriously. Fill it out, send it back, right? All that can increase the response rate. Or a follow-up postcard, right? You know, you got a survey a few weeks ago. You know, if you haven't done so already, please fill it out and send it to us, right? So, you know, you can send them a postcard reminding them of that, or give them a call, right? If you have their number, all that will increase the response rate. Okay, I can tell you the college does these mail-in surveys and the response rate is awful, okay? I mean, it's like 5% or something like that. But they wanna know, you know, like for people who have graduated, you know, what are they doing? You know, where did they go? And, or if they've taken on jobs, what kind of jobs have they taken on? You know, useful things we need to know, right? And the response rate is really low, it's like 5%. So they have to send out thousands of these things. And you can imagine how much work that is and how expensive it gets. You can do a survey over the internet. And this is what I do recommend. Please do an internet survey, okay? Remember, there's a pandemic going on, okay? You shouldn't be out there handing out your survey, okay? In the past, I did not allow this because this makes it easier, right? I wanted you to do it the hard way and go out there and talk to people, have them fill out your survey. But now we shouldn't do that. So now I recommend that you do it over the internet, okay? I want you to do it by using Google Forms. Please use Google Forms, okay? Remember, we have Gmail at AVC, right? We actually have an account with Google. All of you do. You have an account, okay? Your AVC login will get you into Gmail, right? And you might have another Gmail account. Please don't use that one. Use the one that you use for the college, okay? Your login, your AVC login, right, for Gmail. It will get you into YouTube. It will get you into the services for Google. One of those services is Google Forms. So just do a search. Type in Google Forms, right? And you say, and make sure you don't click on the ad, okay? Because there's ads, okay, that you think it's Google Forms and it's not, okay? You go to the one that says Google Forms, okay? It's by Google, okay? You click on that one and you'll start typing it in and doing your survey. And it'll give you an option that you can mail out your survey to a bunch of people. You can copy and paste a bunch of email addresses. You can create a link and post it somewhere so people can respond. So it makes it a lot easier. And by the way, it's also going to collect your responses and organize them in a spreadsheet. which is going to be due at some point in the semester. So please use Google Forms, okay? If you don't do it, you're making it hard for yourself, okay? I require you to use Google Forms. Please do that, okay? There's other things like SurveyMonkey that I don't want you to use, okay? SurveyMonkey does everything for you, okay? Some of these services are paid, some of them are free. I forget if SurveyMonkey is free or it's paid, but there's a whole bunch of services that where you can do surveys. Oh, and that reminds you, by the way, when you're gonna use Google Forms, okay? Not Google Surveys. I believe Google Surveys is something you have to pay for, but you can do everything through Google Forms, okay? But if you use SurveyMonkey, right? Or other internet, other forms of doing it on the internet, the advantage is it's economical. It's very easy, often free, okay? Very efficient, very easy, often free or cheap to do this, right? You have a lot of access to participants. You can mail it out to hundreds or thousands of participants, okay? Easy to find those that share a common interest. If you have access to lists of people, let's say, who all registered for a certain site or subscribe to a certain site, then that means they have an interest in that topic. You can find people who share a common interest, right? Flexibility in presenting your questions. Yes, you have a lot of flexibility when it comes to creating these questions. Check out Google Forms and you'll see. So even though your survey is due like in 2 weeks, some of you might be figuring out, say, oh my God, what am I gonna do? Go to Google Forms and you'll see how easy it is. But of course, first, before that, you have to know, you have to have a topic in mind and you have to have some idea of what kind of questions you wanna ask. But you go use Google Forms, you'll see how easy it is. Other things about internet surveys, limitations, problems, okay? Participants may not be representative. So you send it out to a bunch of people, right? And the people you get may not be representative. Just like with mail-in surveys, the people who respond are more likely to be of some kind than others, okay? And sometimes people who respond may not be who you think they are. A bunch of people misrepresent themselves on the internet, okay? So you may not have a representative sample, okay? Non-response bias, who responds or who doesn't respond? Again, certain kind of people tend to respond, okay? It's those who care more about the subject usually. Difficult to control the sample size. So it's best to use a listserv, or if you have a list of participants, a list of friends or Facebook friends, you can send it out to them or something like that. If you use something like SurveyMonkey or some other service that may be free or paid for, where they send it out to a bunch of people on their own, okay, you may get thousands of participants. Are you gonna analyze all that data? I'll show you how to do it and how to do it easily, but you don't want a sample size that big, okay? You're doing a survey, and yeah, it's good if you have 100, 200 participants, but you have to have at least 50. If you have 50, you're fine. 50 is not that good, believe it or not, but that's the minimum I want, okay, for you to do this survey. But if you have 100, it's better, but you don't want to have too many, okay? Then it becomes a lot, it gets to be a lot of data, okay? Remember, this is an introductory class. I just want you to learn a little bit about how to do this. You have, with surveys, also you have no ability to control or determine the composition of the sample. It could be anyone who could be responding, okay? It could be a bunch of dudes, right? A bunch of males, maybe not so many females. Just like, you know, on those dating sites that exist, the vast majority of people on those dating sites are males. It's like 90% male, okay? So sometimes that's what you get, right? The composition of the sample, or, you know, or there's even people who say that they're one thing and they're not. People who say that they're a certain age, a certain ethnicity, you know, or that they look a certain way, or that they're male, female, and they could be something completely different. You never know who's actually, you know, responding to that survey if you just use these services, okay? But if you have, you know, a bunch of Facebook friends and you actually know who they are, you send it out to them, you know who they are. Okay, let's keep going. You can also do telephone surveys. I don't recommend that, okay? It's really annoying, it's a pain, okay? There are people who actually do this for a living. Their job is to call up people and try to get them to answer a survey, okay? There'll be a lot of no's. There'll be a lot of, leave me alone, I don't care. A lot of people hanging up on you, all right? It takes a toll on your self-esteem, and it hurts you. It really hurts you emotionally. There's some people who don't care. You get used to it, right? But it's a tough job to have, okay, to be that kind of person. But you can try to do it through the telephone. Like I said, I don't want you to do that. Please use Google Forms, okay? It's just gonna make it a lot easier. But, you know, you call people up, right? You can do it from the home. You can do it from the office, right? You can contact a lot of people in a few days. You can go through lists of hundreds of people, right? And you call hundreds of people in a day. But do you really want to do it that way, right? It can be very time consuming. That's a limitation. When it comes to doing a telephone survey, if you're going to do that, in general, you want to do it a certain way, okay? There's certain guidelines. You want to keep questions short, first of all. You want to keep it short, okay? You don't want too many questions because after a while, people you're talking to are going to get fed up and they don't want to hear any more questions. They're going to hang up on you, okay? You want to use few response alternatives, okay? You want to give them a choice, yes, no, something like that, scale of 1 to 5, okay? You don't want to give them an open-ended question. What do you think love is? It's like, no, those are not good questions to do on a telephone, okay? Practice reading the survey out loud, okay, before you call people. Practice reading it with friends to make sure that they can understand what you're saying. Make sure you speak clearly, right? Make sure that you have a good tone, okay? Beware of interviewer bias. Sometimes when you speak and you ask certain questions, it can be very obvious what you believe about the topic or what you believe about the question or how you think they should answer it. There's interviewer bias. Your tone can give it away, right? It's like you ask them about marijuana or something like that. It's like, do you really believe that people should, like legalize marijuana? Or like, I mean, I didn't do a good job there, but I mean, your tone can give it away that you're against it or that you're for it. Come on, do you really want to vote for Trump? Or do you really want to vote for Biden, right? It can be very obvious what you believe based on how you talk, right? So you want to have a very neutral tone, okay? So your tone should be neutral, right? Your responses to questions, right? All those, you want them to be neutral, okay? Like you want to ask, you want to give a neutral tone, neutral response, like, okay, let's move on to the next question, right? Okay, sure, right, next question, right? Or, you want to keep it neutral, okay? If they ask you for questions, clarification, just repeat the question and identify yourself at the beginning when you're gonna, of course, do a telephone survey. My name is so-and-so, I'm doing a survey, blah, 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 we want to know what you think. But you'd be surprised how often this is violated, okay? I've participated in these things. I've had people call me for political stuff, for other stuff. And I can tell you these people need further training, okay? It's very obvious how biased they are, especially when it comes to political stuff. But when it comes to political stuff, they're always biased and they want you to know that they believe a certain thing, and they want you to answer it the way that they want, so they can have their survey that shows that they should pass this law, right? Versus this other one, or it's always very biased. I've gotten stuff in the mail, that says that survey about like clean energy that asked, do something. I don't remember the way the questions were exactly worded, but it asked something like, do you believe we should have, good, reliable energy? In other words, your fossil fuels. And it said, or expensive, unreliable, renewable energy. You can easily see that survey, they're against renewable energy. And they don't want you to pass whatever that thing has to do with. It was a political thing that I got in the mail, right? Done by the representative of the place we live in. They're not for it, okay? I am for renewable energy, just to tell you about that, okay? You can also do your surveys in person. I do not recommend this, okay? Don't do this, okay? There's a pandemic going on. Don't go up to people, okay? Even if you're wearing a mask, just stay away from them. Do it on the internet, okay? But here's some information about how this is done. In-person surveys, okay? You go up to people and you ask them to complete your survey. You give them a sheet of paper. There are many ways you can do it. You can go up to people one-on-one out there, let's say on the college campus, if it was open, right? In a mall or some other place, right? You can do it in the classroom, in the lunchroom, right? At the workplace. Actually, they probably won't let you do it in a workplace unless you get permission. You can ask an instructor, right? to give you permission to pass out the survey to his or her entire class. And if you do it that way, you get 100% response rate, okay? Everyone in the class gets it, they all fill it out, okay? If you do it that way, you can give them instructions, okay? You know, the instructions should be clear. You can survey an entire group all at once, like I said, a classroom, very efficient. You can get like 100 surveys filled out in like 10 minutes, right? If you have a class of 100 people do it, you can get 100% response rate if you do it in a place where everyone's sitting and everyone is there, they all get it, they all fill it out, right? If the instructor says, hey, please fill this out, they're all gonna do it, okay? Disadvantages, it can still be very time consuming, especially if you do it one-on-one, okay? There can still be interviewer bias. You talk to them, they may know how you feel about the subject, okay, based on the instructions you give them. You know, that may still be evident. You can also do what's called an in-person interview. An in-person interview is like you do a survey with one person, okay? Usually, you spend a lot of time with these people and you go over the questions with them. And usually these in-person interviews are basically for people who are very important or key individuals, key informants. So it might be an interview of a police chief, a mayor, a dean, or something like that. Or someone else, right? Someone you're gonna spend a lot of time with and you're gonna go over your questions. They're gonna answer them and you're gonna record their responses. Advantages, you can get a very detailed interview this way and you can do a follow-up. You can follow up with them later, talk to them again, you know. You can explore complex issues because you're gonna spend a lot of time with this one person, right? It can be used for people who are blind. You might need to do an in-person interview for someone who is blind. They can't, you know, fill out your survey. Let's say if you have it on, on a printout, okay? They can do it on the internet, by the way. They can still do it, but you can also interview them and ask them the questions out loud, and they can give you their responses. People who can't read, you know, like kids, for instance, they may not be able to read. Or people who have a low IQ, again, like children, or people who may not understand the survey if they were to, if they were to get it and try to fill out themselves. So you basically have to tell them about it and elicit their responses. More about in-person interviews. There are problems with that. There's always, no method is perfect, okay? There's limitations. Interviewer bias can distort results, especially when you're interviewing someone. It can be very obvious that you're biased, okay? It's kind of hard to hide your bias when it comes to certain things. And when you're talking to them one-on-one, it can be very obvious when you smile, when you nod, right? Your tone, your posture actually reveals how you feel about things. Solution, of course, it can be to have a consistent tone, consistent attitude, a neutral tone that doesn't give away how you feel about the subject. Adopt a universally mildly positive response, like okay, to whatever the participant says. Not like good, or that's awesome, or great, right? You want to be neutral, okay? And here's a review of the strengths and weaknesses of the different things we talked about. And that is where we will stop. So let me go ahead and stop recording.